In the spring of 2021, two friends and I decided to start a restaurant in our backyard. We didn't plan to make any money off this restaurant. In fact, all the food was free, and we only served one table of 4 strangers every single week. You might ask yourself, why would we do something like this? But let me zoom out to provide a bit of context. In the spring of 2021, my friends and I also felt like we were at the beginning of the end of the COVID pandemic. Vaccines started to be rolled out, and it felt like we finally had our golden ticket back into the real world. But as we started to venture back into our pre-pandemic routines, we felt like something in particular felt very different. As we started to explore the places that we used to regular in our hometown, the restaurants and the coffee shops, we noticed that it didn't seem to serve the same purpose that they once did. Places that used to feel like vibrant social hubs for people to interact now felt like ghost kitchens, with people just standing around shelves ready to pick up their food and standing awkwardly far apart on their phones. While I didn't realize it at the time, what I was experiencing was the death of my third places. Can I get a show of hands in the audience? Who here is familiar with the concept of a third place? Well, it was a term coined by this very smart-looking man by the name of Ray Oldenburg in 1989 in his book called The Great Good Place. In it, he essentially documents the 3 places that we spend the most of our time. The first place is the home. It's where we deepen our family connections, where we get to express the most individuality. The second place is work, a place of routine that's very mundane, with more rigid social hierarchies that are more strictly enforced. Finally, Oldenburg describes the third place. It's where we get to spend the rest of our time. He describes them as being neutral public spaces that typically foster broad and inclusive social interactions. You could think of these like the churches or gyms in your local hometown. Maybe it's the college bar that you would regular, and you get to see a friend that lived across campus that has a completely different major that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. Or maybe the arcade that you'd skateboard to with your friends after a day of middle school. Essentially, third places get to go beyond the rigidity of the second place of work and beyond the isolation of home. They allow communities to interact beyond social boundaries. This other gentleman, Robert Putnam, another smart-looking gentleman, Robert Putnam, published a book in 2000 by the title of Bowling Alone. Essentially, he documents the decline of third places in community in America. He outlines that participation across the board in social institutions by Americans has been dropping significantly since 1970. He uses the example of bowling as a clear one. From 1980 to 1993, the total number of Americans that bowled went up by 10%, but the number that participated in bowling leagues decreased by about 40%. Thus the name Bowling Alone. So in the book, Putnam goes on to describe what exactly led to the fall of third places, what has led to their decline. In it, he analyzes things like changes in labor force participation, as well as suburbanization and changing city planning. But ultimately, he comes to the conclusion that there's one prime reason for the decline of third places in America, and that's technology. Now, keep in mind, this book was published back in the year of 2000, where the cutting edge of technology was a 720p flat screen TV that was just released at Best Buy. Putnam essentially goes on to describe Americans are now choosing to sit on their couches and watch TV as opposed to going out and interacting with their communities. And the problem's only gotten worse in the quarter century since he wrote this book. Americans are now no longer just choosing to sit at home on their screens, but instead go out to public places, maybe on the bus or in line, or even at third places like coffee shops, and stay glued to screens that resemble those of the TV. Places that used to be vibrant, third places that still exist today, no longer serve the same purpose because it's now more of a place of mutual isolation as opposed to a place of social interaction. And from here, it doesn't seem like it's getting much better. Even back in 2000, Putnam warned about the future of virtual reality, something that he thought would be the nail in the coffin for third places. Essentially, right now, it seems like things are getting worse. Massive technology companies like Apple and Meta are dumping billions of dollars into virtual reality, in order to take the 7 hours on average of screen time an American has all the way up to the 16 waking hours we have on average that they're hoping to capture. And so the question becomes, what happens now? Where do we go from here? Are we doomed to this dystopian reality of hyper-isolation and individuality, where third places are just a relic of the past? Well, this is the same question that two friends and I asked ourselves in the spring of 2021 when we decided to open a restaurant in our backyard. We felt like the COVID pandemic had given us a glimpse into what the future would look like if we didn't change course soon. We began to ask ourselves, what could we do? What role could we play in swinging the pendulum in the other direction, bringing back community and third places in modern society? We came up with a pretty simple idea. If we could predict initial social compatibility amongst a group of strangers, essentially, if we could identify who it was at that third place that you'd interact with best, the person that you'd bump into and have that magical moment where you realize the two of you love the same niche 1980s rock band, then we could facilitate that interaction. We could accelerate those chance social encounters and essentially engineer the serendipity that third places have. So we set out on a mission to try and create this machine learning model that could predict initial social compatibility amongst a group of strangers. We did so by starting a research project. And the first step was to come up with a questionnaire by analyzing the psychological literature out there around social compatibility. We put together this questionnaire and had friends take it. And we'd invite them to our backyard to host them for dinner, where they got to interact and meet with others. In our backyard, we hoped to see if we could figure out exactly what made people get along. We'd cook them a pasta dinner and serve them wine, and offer these question cards to try and create a more meaningful environment conducive of social interaction. From there, afterwards, we'd ask them a follow-up survey of how much they enjoyed their experience with each individual they met that night, and what made them get along, or also what made them not get along. And then we used that data to train machine learning models and build a data set for our product. But what became clear to us was that we hadn't just built a machine learning model and a data set after that spring of hosting people for dinners. What happened was that week after week, as we invited more friends to come and participate in these dinners, we felt like we were building a third place of our own. We felt like each week, as friends came back from the last week, they got to know each other a little bit better. People who were in the dinner last week would come back and interact just in the living room, or to help us cook the dinner, or serve the wine, or write the question cards. We felt like we really had successfully built a third place of our own. We also found out and realized that we weren't alone in this sense of a lack of third places. It was clear that our friends shared the sentiment that they felt like their own third places were dying. And that's why they kept coming back. This felt like our first semblance of community after a year of lockdowns. So from here, with this insight, the three of us decided to move in together up in Los Angeles and take this project and try to turn it into a product. We hoped that we could replicate what we did in our backyard, creating a third place for our own friends, and take that and replicate it in public places, restaurants, and venues, to see if we could offer third places to as many people as we possibly could. We spent the days sketching out on our chalkboard exactly what the product would look like, and in the evening, we coded it all up. As we did this at the beginning of the fall, we were prepared to launch the product. Essentially, we realized we needed three things to replicate what we did in our own backyard. First, we needed the people. We needed enough people to want to come and interact and have these meaningful social experiences. To do so in our product, we basically built the most simple version of an RSVP platform. We'd send out curated invites each week, offering people a 2-2 experience happening at this place at this time in their city. If our friends wanted to attend, they'd RSVP yes and pay a small curation fee in order to be told the details moving forward. The second thing we needed was a place to have a more intimate environment at first. This would resemble the dinner that we were hosting in our own backyard. We thought that the restaurants would obviously be a perfect place for this, to help people mingle and interact beyond the superficialities of normal day-to-day life. This is one of the restaurants that we chose to use for the first time. A little quick aside here. We needed a name for this product as well. And at the time, the the address that we were hosting these backyard dinners at was 222 North Schaefer Street. So our friends, whenever they'd come, they'd ask, "Are you guys going to 222 this week?" And so that name stuck. We called the product 222. And this is us writing 222 on the chalk wall of one of the restaurants we chose for our first experience. The last thing we knew we needed was a place for people to congregate after the fact. A place that was less rigid and allowed people to go beyond just the rigidity of their dinner groups and meet others and mingle. So from there, we were able to launch our product in Los Angeles. We had our first experience in the fall of 2021. And from there, we felt like it was a huge success. Although it was so small, and it was only 3 groups, about 12 people, and most of them being our own friends, we felt like we had succeeded at our mission of bringing a third place to a public location, creating that semblance of community for our 12 friends. From there, we realized that we needed to take this product and turn it into a company. And that took some work. We faced a lot of challenges along the way. And I won't dive too deep into them, but one of them was definitely growth. How do we go beyond this 200-person list that's mainly our friends that we were texting each week to host experiences? Some of the ideas we initially had was we would walk around campus and pass out these question cards that were supposed to resemble what were on the dinner tables of our initial backyard dinners. And while this was in some ways a humiliating process to walk around campus and just hand out question cards to people, it was also very exciting. But ultimately, we came up with other growth strategies, and I won't dive too deep into that. And finally, the product felt like it was starting to work. We got some traction. The second thing was investors. And at the time, it was a very good time in late 2021 to raise money if you were an NFT startup, which we clearly were not. And so it was in some ways soul-crushing to go time after time, pitch after pitch, and get rejected, and then turn around and see investors basically give a multi-million-dollar valuation to one guy with a PDF of a plan of how he's going to bring an NFT to the market. Eventually, though, after a lot of perseverance, we were able to raise money from some of the best investors in Silicon Valley, and we're beyond grateful for their support. Essentially, fast forward to today, and 222 now operates in both LA and New York. We provide multiple experiences per night in both LA and New York to all of our members, with expansion coming soon. And we've gone beyond just dinners to bars or to venues like that afterwards. We've tried to capture the full spectrum of third places. Everything from things like paint and sips to yoga classes to thrift shopping experiences. And so what seemed to be such a small project, just hosting some backyard dinners, now to us feels like our fighting chance of bringing back things like third places and community in America. If there's anything I hope anyone takes away from this, it's that starting something as small as a backyard dinner can start to actually make a change in something like social tech, where it feels like the past 2 decades have been characterized by companies trying to take us away from each other and divide us more, as opposed to bringing us together. I hope that anyone out there who's hoping to build a company in the social tech space actually takes the chance and decides to choose chance. Thank you.